5 o'clock. And we are now recording, so that's wonderful. So welcome everyone to the Fillmore-Piru Groundwater Sustainability Agency. I'm calling this meeting to order, and I'd like to do the Pledge of Allegiance. And if I can get, let's see, who do we have? Director Jackson, would you like to lead us in the pledge?
Yes, I will. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And then roll call.
Okay, Director Fornoff,
Here.
Director Jackson,
Here.
Director Kimball,
Here.
Chair Long,
Here.
Director Minigan,
Here.
Director Villaseñor.
Here. Here.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All directors are here for our meeting today. Next up we have is public comment. Any public comments? Anything submitted?
Nothing in the chat.
In seeing none, there's no chats or anything, so we'll move to the next one, which is the approval of the agenda. Is there any changes or for this agenda, or can I get a motion to approve?
Chair Long, no recommended changes from staff.
Okay, wonderful. Motion, please.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. And a second?
I'll do the second. It's Carol.
Okay, it's first by Director Jackson and second by Director Fornoff.
That's Villaseñor.
Oh, Villaseñor. Thank you very much.
No problem.
And with that, roll call, please.
Okay, Director Fornoff,
Aye.
Director Jackson,
Aye.
Director Kimball,
Aye.
Chair Long,
Aye.
Director Minigan,
Aye.
Director Villaseñor.
Aye.
Perfect.
Thank you. Motion is approved unanimously. Next is our updates, and we always appreciate hearing from our directors. First, we have our Fillmore Puppers Association.
I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I have no update this month.
No disappointment, only opportunities. Our Piru Pumpers Association.
And I echo that, as we have not met.
Environmental stakeholders.
Also, nothing much happening on my front with regards to GDE and GSA.
City of Fillmore.
I do have a short update. So we, this elections just got certified, and this coming Tuesday at our next council meeting, we will be swearing in 3 new council members. We have Carrie Brogy, who is a former council member. She may have even sat on this board previously. I think she did. Okay, so Carrie is back in for a full 4-year term. And she was just past Planning Commission director, chair, I should say. And we have Chris Corolla. He is a lifetime Fillmore resident, as well as his family. And first time he will be at the 2-year seat. And Albert Mendez, another planning commissioner, was elected to the 4-year seat. So that will happen this coming Tuesday. And also last week, Tony Emmerich and I met with our city staff manager, David Rollins, along with Erica Herrera, our assistant city manager. And we talked about the potential for upgrading our council chambers to be able to include hybrid technology. And so I have a follow-up meeting with David next week, and we're basically going to do a little bit of strategizing with our sort of figuring out how to bring this topic forward to our new council members and talk about the the importance of it, and how for the GSA as well as other commissions and boards and those who may use our council chambers, it would be really beneficial. So really hoping that this does move forward. So I'll keep this board informed how that moves. Thank you.
Thank you. United.
No, I want to start by thanking you, Christina and Tony, particularly Christina, for navigating the City Hall and I hope we can help and be a positive influence, and help in any way we can. I don't really have an update from United. I would say it's quiet in that everybody has their head down and to finish the year and complete everything and lay the groundwork for next year's successes. So pretty quiet.
Okay, for County of Ventura, it has not been quiet at all. We've had some big election stuff going on. In fact, we have had, what, 4 of our elected officials have retired. Our sheriff, we had our clerk recorder, we have our assessor, and then we also had our tax collector. We had our ceremonies yesterday or Tuesday, whatever day today is, for that, which was a great send off. And those that have been elected to follow are really good people. So if you need them, they're really great and responsible. Also, we have 2 new supervisors that are going to be joining us. Janice Parvin will be taking Supervisor Huber's seat. And then Jeff Gorell will be taking Supervisor Parks' seat. Both of those supervisors, Huber and Parks, are not running, did not run again. And so we have those 2 seats that are open, along with our appointed VNA Lopez, who will be there for the remainder of that seat election. So her election and my election are both up in 2024, along with Supervisor Levere. So a lot of great things. If you saw the article, I'm now the oldest standing on the board, which is quite shocking to me. Someone called me a silverback and I said, what? Like I'm just the oldest of all, but you know, I took that as a compliment, if you would, especially with term limits. It makes things very hard to keep that historical knowledge. So I just wanted to really thank all of you who know water, because we really appreciate your historical knowledge as electeds need education and really a good information so we can make good decisions. So I just wanted to thank all of you for that. We also have many city council, water boards and so forth that are changing as well. We had Charlotte Craven in Camarillo City Council that her event last night. She was served on the board for 36 years. She's the longest standing elected for the county. And so she and Sean Wilshay have stepped down. And then we have 3 more that have gone in, just like with Fillmore. That also happened in Santa Paula as well. And then we have Oxnard and so forth. So as we talk about water basins, I always like to talk about elected officials as well, because we need their commitment to water issues as well. So with that, then also there's a huge demand for housing, as you know, from the governor's office, the need for housing, homeless as well, affordable housing, just to put that on your radar as we talk about water, and then also our economy and how we might be in a deficit from the state perspective coming up, which might mean that less grants come, is how I put those 2 to 2 together. And so the better we are at grant writing, I think will be really good. So I appreciate you all's efforts on that. So that's all I have to report. And we had our State of the Union, and that is online at our Ventura County website that you can look at for how we've done and what we're focusing on for the next year. So that's that. Okay, moving on to our executive director spot.
Mr. Long and board, I have a couple things to update. I did mention last week or last month, a couple of weeks ago, that the monitoring wells project is completed, and Eric Elliott is here to give a presentation later and share about that project. So that's a happy report on that one. It all worked well, and Eric will talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Groundwater sustainability planning grant. So we're busy working on another grant application, but we're still trying to wrap up the last one. And so I'm happy to report that the majority of the work that was associated with that grant is completed. We have a few documents to submit still, and our last invoice, which will be a good one. But work needs to conclude on that grant by December 31st. And then we'll be putting together the last progress report and invoice, and then a final grant wrap up. And it's always a little bit interesting in doing those grant reports. And so I think, at least from my perspective, DWR ought to be pleased with our performance. We were able to produce the 2 GSPs. We were able to get monitoring wells in very key locations where we need some information. That lines up with the kinds of comments that we've seen from DWR. And I think our documents and our submittals have been good quality. And one thing that I usually don't think about is DWR wants you to try to spend all the money. And that's always tough, 5 years ago, to guess how much money we were going to spend. And it looks like we will be able to spend all the money. We've been chasing different targets, but that won't be a strike against us in DWR's mind. I think we have enough work to invoice them for the 100% of the grant. So we'll be working on that as we're applying for a new one. And as Director Villaseñor said, we had a good meeting with Fillmore representatives. We do have the council chambers reserved starting in March. That doesn't seem too far away, but we will need to have a majority of us present in the same place within the service area. So that's lined up for 4 o'clock on the 3rd Thursdays. I think it's very wise for the city manager to discuss with his new council. So we have an advocate and Director Villaseñor, who has seen the benefit of this kind of technology, and as I've shared, United is very willing to help with this. We have some tech folks, and I think Dave did bring his IT consultant to that meeting. And one thing that Chair Long shared with us is even if the city of Fillmore doesn't decide to upgrade the council chambers at this point, we may have a room in the community meeting room and the library upgrade. So there's a project going on to expand the library. I'm sure that was driven by needing ADA compliant restrooms because they were very old, and they wanted to have a meeting space also. And it's my understanding that the meeting space will be equipped with hybrid meeting technology.
Yes, so the Library Foundation and a $500,000 donation from Mrs. Wigley, if anyone knows that,
Nice.
family in the local area, had started this project. I pushed the county to also make an investment in of $750,000, and then we got 1.5 million from the state with Senator Lamone and Jackson at the time.
Nice.
And so it is a library expansion. And so it has a huge meeting room now it's about the same size of the library, I think it is. And they have the hybrid availability there. So Nancy Schramm, if we're interested in looking at that as an option, if say the city of Fillmore's location isn't up and running for a while, just to look at it. So.
But Chair Long, that's all I have. We got plenty of other stuff to talk about, so I'll be quiet.
All right, legal counsel.
Okay, I have a very brief update. And for those of you whom I haven't met, my name is Alex Lemieux. I'm an associate of Steve O'Neill, who's on vacation this evening, so I'm just filling in for him. I have been speaking with County Council regarding Executive Order N-7-22 That's the one that requires that counties will not approve a permit for a new groundwater well or for alteration of an existing well in certain basins without first obtaining written verification from the relevant GSA that the proposed well would not interfere with the GSP or decrease the likelihood of achieving the sustainability goals. There's a little bit of ambiguity on exactly what the interplay is between the county approval process, how CEQA might apply, and exactly what the role is with the GSA. So with Tony Emmert and Tony Morgan, we've been trying to work out a process and a flow chart dealing with county council on how we would comply with that executive order. I think that's really all there is to update you on. I think you've probably already been briefed on the fact that when the governor has stated that his executive order regarding remote, I beg your pardon, the state of emergency may be allowed to lapse early next year in February. When that happens, we'll have to switch from remote meetings to majority in-person meetings. So I'm sure my colleagues advised you on that, but there'll be at least another meeting before that happens, most likely. I think that's all I really have to update you on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now our GSP consultant.
Let's run through a few things here this evening. Let me get this out of your way so you can see a little better. Okay, got quite a few things to talk about. Current activities that we've been working on include the implementation grant, which we'll talk about later. And then also the INSAR subsidence update is ongoing, and the annual reports that the board authorized last meeting are underway. So there are quite a few things that are brewing out there that are important for us to be aware of. I attended the Aqua meeting here a couple of weeks ago, and there was a lot of discussion with DWR and the State Water Resources Control Board regarding Sigma. Imagine that. The good news is the round 2 grant funds are now expected to be a little more flush with cash, and they're now estimated to be 250 million. So there's a few more shekels in there to be allocated out to the various basins. The other side of that same coin is that DWR is reminding us that this grant is likely to be the last big money for Sigma unless a new water bond is passed. So his blunt comment was, if you need it, you better get it now. There's a state deficit anticipated for at least the next 4 years, according to the Legislative Analyst Office. They're anticipating $25 billion deficit next year.
Wow.
That's assuming there's only 4% inflation. We're already at 7 to 8, depending on who you believe. If you back calculate the deficit, that now takes it somewhere to the $40 to $48 billion number for next year. And it also assumes there's not a recession. So if we bring in the trifecta and add a recession on top of everything, that pushes next year's deficit to something like $65 billion. So that's probably going to feather out over a few years. You know, with the $25 billion deficit, they were expecting to last 4 years. A $65 billion deficit may last 7 or 8 years. So one of the comments he made is that if you're thinking of coming to the state with a new whiz-bang project and looking for money from the state, he said, you're going to be competing with the state agencies and department themselves for general fund dollars for the next few years. Those departments are going to be dog eat dog to make sure they have money to cover their own departments out of the state budget. So it was not a very pleasant ending to that conversation. There were a lot of long faces. I know from people I talk with that the state is already short paying some counties and short paying some school districts. So it doesn't look like there's a good opportunity for additional grant monies coming in over the next few years. So that's depressing. So let's move on. Oops, hang on. There was discussion from some folks with DWR about, hey, our GSP reviews aren't going to be available till January for our basins, for example, and there's not going to be much time to implement those changes before your 5-year update is due. So if you're 2 years into it for the review by DWR, and then you're going to take the last chunk of the last year to finalize your document, get it ready to submit, that leaves you with about 2 years to implement something. And so beyond what DWR might recommend. So DWR was very acknowledging of this fact and said they will take into consideration that when reviewing the 5-year updates, that you really don't have a whole lot of time to figure out how you're going to implement some new project, some new issue that DWR might raise during the GSP review process, and then get the funding and then be able to implement that and have much to report for the 5-year updates. They wanted you to make sure that you did say you're moving forward and making progress towards addressing them, but they understood that the fuse is kind of short to make monumental progress on any of those things. Every meeting we have with DWR, someone says, hey, where's the guidance document for surface water and groundwater interaction, which is basically an issue that DWR pings every single basin on in some form or another. Well, they reported that the draft is now scheduled to be available mid-2024. So it's not going to come out anytime soon. And so that leaves you a very little time to hit your 5-year update with information from that. Big picture items. The state is expecting to lose about 10% of their water supply due to climate change. And that translates into having to find something on the order of 4 million acre feet of water per year to replace those losses. And so there's a lot of conversation about we can't conserve our way out of this kind of a drought. You know, we can implement things that help, but that's not going to fix the situation. And so we're going to need to have some a little more innovation, a little more creative thinking about how we're going to come up with that 4 million acre feet of water. The well permitting situation that legal counsel just mentioned came up again, and DWR was adamant. They would not support additional well permitting legislation, particularly if that legislation was looking to make well permits potentially subject to CEQA. They're not in favor of that. They don't think that's necessary or appropriate, and they have communicated that position to Assemblyman Bennett. And the word they got back from his staff was that it's coming back likely next session with some modified language. What, we don't know, but likely to come back. So one of the comments that DWR was making that was, I guess, helpful, but basically guiding GSAs to look at the GSPs that have been reviewed and find out what kind of comments DWR has been making on them. The idea was that you might be able to glean some idea into DWR's thought processes by looking at what they had said about other basins, particularly those maybe that are nearby. And so this is directly correlative to what Director Minigan has suggested and asked before. So it's right on point with that. And so staff took a look at the Oxnard Plain GSP comments from DWR with the primary focus of their attention to environmental topics. And they didn't talk about steelhead really, but they did have comments about the delineation of GDEs and in particular, the connection of the semi-perched aquifers to others. And so I think those are insightful comments to glean. I think we have advanced ourselves past that point. We've already begun working on the delineation of GDEs in the GSP and had a very highly respected organization help us delineate the most important GDEs there. And then we've already been putting in some monitoring wells to address those shallow aquifer situations. And then we've got more of that kind of stuff dealing with GDEs outlined for the upcoming grant application that you directors have been talking about. So we've got things in there for surface and groundwater interaction, basically the rising groundwater quantification, upgrading the groundwater flow model to be more detailed, in particular in those areas with the rising groundwater and then the GDEs and those kinds of things. So we're already proposing to do more on those topics that were the hot points for DWR with respect to the Oxnard Plain. So I think that's all I have on this for this evening. If there are any questions, happy to entertain.
Just on that one bill for Assemblymember Bennett, I was told on the state level that there'll be a lot, if that was to come out, there would have to be a lot taken out of that bill. So just so you know.
And,
We'll
and we
see
will.
when we see it.
We'll see it when we get it, and we'll all smile if that's the case.
Yeah.
So
I'm sorry.
the point that you made about California is projected to lose 10% of its water supply due to climate change. I did meet with Pacific Institute on behalf of Friends of the Santa Clara River, and we have scoped out a regional water analysis to kind of do a cost benefit analysis and identify different types of like a regional water resiliency portfolio. So it's kind of like taking the state water resiliency portfolio recommendations and drilling those down for the Santa Clara River watershed. And they actually, you know, they are a think tank, and what's come out of that, because they've had discussions with Watershed Progressive, who's been doing similar work for the Ventura River watershed, but also with Lynn Rodriguez at the Watershed Coalition of Ventura County. I think this issue is definitely resonating with folks locally, but it's really to look at what our long-term planning for water supply is and what those opportunities are and what those are going to cost. And I'm hoping to have a scope of work and a budget by the new year. We had a follow-up meeting and we refined the scope of work. It also looks like they're actually hiring someone at Pacific Institute with a specific set of expertise to take on this task. Yeah, because I do, you know, it's definitely how do we bring in stormwater recycling. It's definitely not going to be a conserving your way out of it point of view, but yeah, it's definitely time to get innovative and more collaborative and multi-benefit out of how we invest our funding moving forward. And it's really like how to cost that out so that we're investing our capital infrastructure funding better regionally. So once I have a number, you know, and once that moves forward, I'll also let folks know. But that's something that I'm definitely pushing in 2023.
Okay, Director Fornoff.
Yeah, you know, it's crazy because, you know, first we're happy that we aren't in a high priority and happen to do this GSP early on, like some of the Central Valley. And now that the state and their financial, you know, situation, you know, that kind of limits us. You know, we're fighting for grant money, and Tony is are we going to be fighting against those who've already received grant money from the higher priorities? I mean, how can we move ourselves up the ladder and get recognized, and rather than, you know, everything going to the higher priority on this next round?
Director.
Go ahead,
Tony.
I was just going to say, the critically overdrafted basins have already had an opportunity to get round 2 money. They are still eligible to, or excuse me, round 1 money for this next round, next group of grants. The round 2 money that we're going to be applying for is also available to those critically overdrafted basins. But is our understanding from talking with DWR that they will give consideration that those folks have already had a bite at the apple, and give some of those who have not had such a bite at the apple a chance to get some grant money in advance. So Danielle may have more input on that because she's been speaking with DWR.
Yes, so the way that they are handling that is that if our grant application ties with a grant application from one of the critically overdrafted basins, they will give priority to any of the basins that have not yet had a bite at the apple. But we have to tie with or do better than in the points than those basins. If they score higher than we do because their application is better, they get the funding. So they're going on a straight point value system. So it's really critical that our grant is put together as cleanly and according to the formatting that DWR is requesting, because in that instance, if we tie with those basins, we will get that funding. And that's across the board how they're trying to make it as fair as possible.
So we need to sharpen our pencil and load up the grant with a bunch of big words and ideas and go for the gusto. It's otherwise we're going to be funding this stuff ourselves.
I would do the opposite of the big words, honestly. It's the big ideas that win the grants, that are plainly stated, cleanly stated, and according to the questions that they ask. The more jargon that you throw into those grant applications, the more cross-eyed the reviewers go. They miss out on scoring points when you sort of jumble up your grant application with a lot of fancy language. So, but don't worry, we have that well in hand. I think we're making really good progress.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Danielle's been really diligent about pestering the executive director and myself with saying, hey, we need to talk about this, and what are these benefits, and how do we weave that into our conversation, because we get points if we talk about this in it. So she's on it.
And I just go on like some of the conversations that Lynn Rodriguez has been having with Pacific Institute is how the IRWM program has done a good job or not a good job of actually really quantifying all the benefits, those multiple benefits. I think sometimes they've been nicely spoken and explained in words, but the quantification of all the co-benefits that have come out of these IRWM programs are not that clear. And it's like really quantifying those so that we are adequately capturing the multiple benefits of projects. Okay, you are on mute.
Thank you. Okay, Director Kimball, if you could.
Yeah, so I think you can see what Daniel's talking about and the product of her work in what presented in our board packet. I thought that was really good and really effective. So thank you. The other thing I wanted to say to Candace too is, I mean, you attended the United Water Summit, and so you're aware. I think United's done a fair bit of work on projects costing and cost benefit analysis. So getting those two together could be really helpful. There's a lot of groundwork, deep groundwork that's been done already on projects, not so much at our end of the watershed, but we all affect each other, and when they run short, they'll be looking at us. So
Yeah,
Uh,
for sure. And I think it was, what we'd really like to do is bring in the city and the county's capital projects and really look at it from a big regional point of view. United has been good in identifying what they want to move forward, but it's kind of bringing everybody on board to do the same and then prioritize accordingly to get the biggest bang for our buck for our investment.
Okay, so I'm going to remind us where all of this is information, good question, just questions to the GSP on items that he spoke about. Candace, did you have another question as you has your hand raised?
Yeah, I just wanted to stress, when I went to the California Environmental Lawyers Association conference in Yosemite, they did an update on the Colorado River, and Metropolitan Water is pretty much agreed to be exporting water from California to support that infrastructure at Lake Mead. That is like a priority, and that's come out of legal negotiations there. So I think there's even going to, there's the state deficit, but there's also very much an expected and agreed upon export of California water resources out of the state. And so there is, this whole, state water project, water saving us is kind of not on the agenda, I think. And we have to really consider our alternatives with more priority moving forward. It was a sobering presentation for me, and I think anybody that was in the room. And I think that needs to be clear to everyone on this board too. State water projects, water is not going to solve our problems or build our local resiliency.
Okay, if that's it with the questions, we're going to move on to our consent calendar. Thank you everyone for all the updates. I really do appreciate it. On our consent calendar, is there any questions on any of the items? If not, I need a motion to approve.
So moved.
Okay, Director Fornoff, thank you for the first, and a second, please.
Second.
Director Jackson is a second.
Chair Long, I did have a question.
Yes.
On the financials, why have we not booked any of the January to June groundwater receipts? Because is that just because they haven't completed the audit, or?
Director Kimball, yes, I think that's just a timing issue.
Okay.
Revenue has come in, but it hasn't been booked to the agency's general ledger yet. So I always have that question too. I'm thinking, when is the revenue going to show up? But it eventually does.
Okay, good question. Is there any other questions? Okay, we have a first and a second. Roll call, please.
Okay. Director Fornoff,
Aye.
Director Jackson,
Aye.
Director Kimball,
Aye.
Chair Long,
Aye.
Director Minigan,
Aye.
Director Villaseñor. Perfect.
Perfect. That is passes unanimously. Thank you. And next up is our 4A Sustainable Groundwater Management Grant Program, Sigma Implementation Grant.
Chair Long, I'll kick it off, and then Tony Morgan's going to share a little bit with you. We did our best to summarize all the various documents that are going to be part of the grant application. And I think it's a pretty clear document in that, to me, it makes sense. It's in line with our previous GSPs. It's in line with the things that we've talked about with your board. And over the past few months, we've tried to zero that in. We have a little bit of work to do. I guess I would say a significant amount of work to do over the next few days to try to complete assembling all the things in the way that Danielle shared earlier, that we have to make sure that we are not missing any parts and additional documents that they asked for, and that all of these descriptions are not only describing what we want to do and how much they're going to cost and how long they're going to take, but we'll also make sure that there are sentences in there that will get us to points. So taking a look again before these are all finalized. So that's our task over the next few days. I was going to take a trip to Tahiti someplace, but Danielle canceled that for me and said, no, you aren't going anywhere this weekend. So tomorrow morning, Tony Morgan and Danielle and I are meeting to try to switch gears to starting to try to make sure we have all those final pieces assembled. And then those need to be all uploaded to the DWR's grants portal before mid-morning on Friday, mid-morning Pacific time.
Okay.
So that's going to be really early in the morning for Danielle. But we hope that it doesn't come down to Friday. So our goal is by very early in the week, we have everything together and the uploading can commence. And one thing to note, I did a very much summarized grant budget so that your board could see, hey, over the next 3 years, if we receive this grant, this is sort of how the costs break down. Tony's sharing that screen. I had to kind of scrunch it all down together, but I think it's very much in line with what we've talked about. Some of these will be broken into each basin because the applications will be for the Piru Basin and for the Fillmore Basin. And we still have to decide on whether we try to split, say, Task 2 Cienega Springs Drought Relief Pilot Program between the two basins, or more likely have that reside in one of the basin's applications, because say if one of them gets cut and the other one doesn't, then you may not have much of a project. So those things we're going to work through tomorrow morning, but this is really sort of what we would, plus or minus $4 million over the next several years. And remember, the expenditures started October 4th, and then they go until the end of April 2026. So it's a few years, and some of these things are already included in our current budget. So for example, we have some money in because we thought we might have to apply for this grant. So we're using current budget money to work on this application. The subsidence updates using the DWR data 2022, that's already has a task order that DBSNA is working on, as well as the annual reports. I believe that was just last month. So some of these things are already covered by our current budget, but it is important to know that that's a fairly sizable scope of work, and so we have to we're going to have to front this money, and DWR has been about 6 months plus in paying us back. Now, another good thing on the positive side of the ledger is we will soon be putting together our final invoice for the GSP grant, and our upcoming invoice on the monitoring well project will be about $550,000, and that will be a big reimbursement, probably mid 2023. We should probably expect to get that back. Plus, DWR has been holding a 10% retention on the whole thing. So assuming that we do our jobs in the final report and everything pencils out, then they will release that retention at sometime in the next year, probably. Let's say maybe worst case, it might be fall of 2023. So we would have some sizable reimbursements in the hundreds of thousands coming in during that time too. I'm working with United's finance team to try to flesh that out a little bit on how that would pencil out, but I don't have that to share tonight. Most of these things are spread out. Maybe if we go down the list, obviously grant preparation, that will be finished this week. Sequin permitting and a lot of the discussion with the parties out there in the Cienega area. So tasks, component 2, task 1 and 2, that's a little bit front loaded. Probably a lot of time spent in trying to make sure that we get that right. The domestic well drought vulnerability evaluation, that probably will be, that 300 will probably be spread over a couple of years. A lot of work in trying to track down the information, and then probably it'll be easy once we know what we have and we don't have to do that. But we, as your board has felt, that's critically important because that's a problem in the state. And then stakeholder outreach is small. Then if we go down to component 3, model upgrades, that's going to be spread out over time. It's not a huge chunk. And so that's mostly United staff going to be updating the model, and that will be spread out some. And then if we get down into GSP revisions and updates, the big component is that 2027 GSP update. And so that will really hit us pretty hard in that last 2 years or so. So we can't start on that too early, but we probably want to start as early as we can. So that one's going to be a bit of a cash flow spike there. And then of course the annual reports and subsidence, those are all spread out amongst the years that are involved. And those are really the big ones. So we don't have as much of a problem, at least in my opinion, we don't have as much of a problem with this one as we had with the GSP grant, because the agency was starting from zero balance in the checking account and had to do all that stuff, develop 2 GSPs and construct these wells all within that period. So we're not starting from that disadvantaged position that we did before, but we will have to program those into our budget and plan on, I think it's safe to plan on a 6-month on the reimbursement. And of course, there'll be a 10% retention on this too. And Tony, anything that I missed on, or Danielle, anything that we talked about earlier or is important for the board to chew on here?
I think it's important to realize that DWR is not going to make a final decision on the grant amounts until I think it's next June. And then there's usually, what, Tony, 2, 3, 4 months of
I would say, yeah,
paperwork that goes back and forth to finalize the grant. So, it's easily all of next year before we're ready to go with all the paperwork approved by DWR and this agency. So this isn't going to start, in April or anything like that. We're going to have some time.
Yes. Yeah, it's safe to assume, especially with, I don't think DWR's out of the, shadows of the last grants and the many things that the state has been wanting to push through. And they didn't go out and wholesale hire a whole bunch of new grant management engineers. So it's safe to assume, or lawyers. So it's safe to assume if they announce who they're awarding to in the summer, it can easily be at a minimum 3 months and maybe even 6 months until we get a grant agreement signed. So it very well could be this time next year that we will be looking at adopting a grant agreement.
And presumably then it's another 6 months before we would get paid on the first. So we have to fund at least the first year easily, and maybe a year and a half out of our assets.
That's correct.
Hmm.
They usually ask for the first invoice, and it's not much of a grant report, I believe within 30 days of signing the grant agreement. And so, you know, the report would include some things that we've done. So it couldn't, and that, you know, this doesn't have match. So
Right.
it's all directly reimbursable less the retention. And so, you know, those things that we mentioned that are already included in the current budget, those would be able to be submitted, and perhaps maybe next year's subsidence report, if we've made some progress on that. So there are some things that we could submit for reimbursement immediately when the grant is awarded.
Danielle, did we forget to mention anything?
Can I ask
I
a
don't-
question? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I was just gonna say, I don't think so. I think Tony covered everything at this point.
My question was logistic wise, do we have to submit it, the grant individually, or do we submit it together?
We'll submit a separate grant application for each basin in this instance.
And it'll be the same amount for each?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
And as Tony was saying, if you divide the individual projects 50-50 between the two basins, even if they're sharing the work, you run the risk of only getting half of the funding for a specific project. So you may not be able to complete the project. So we don't want to divide the eggs between the baskets. We want to kind of keep them together to make sure that the ones that are prioritized have the best chance of getting the full funding amount.
And Chair Long, the two main ones that we would have to decide on that are probably the component 2, task 2, the Cienega Springs Drought Refuge Pilot Program, which is a discrete project, and probably also component 6, task 1, the rising groundwater evaluation. We'd want to make sure that those were standalone in one or the other of the budgets, so they wouldn't be hamstrung right out of the gate.
Okay, I appreciate that. I just want to make sure it was super clear for everybody. So thank you.
All right, but the 600,000 for Cienega would be for Fillmore, right? Or is it just Fillmore's GSP? You wouldn't split that across both of them, would you? Like
No,
geographic.
I think our current thinking is that we want to keep all the eggs in one basket for that project. So we would, this is one of the things that Tony and Danielle and I are going to talk about tomorrow, and make sure we're all on the same page and that our logic tracks with each other, is that maybe all of that goes into Fillmore.
Yeah.
There's some of the parcels that would fall into Piru, but the bulk of them are really in Fillmore.
Just
And in
from,
fact, that rising groundwater is essentially the definition of the, you know, it's representative of the definition of the pinching of the geology, and the rising groundwater is the effect of that. So I think most of the groundwater dependent ecosystem area is probably on the Fillmore side, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
I would just like to mention briefly that DWR is anticipating a lot of submissions for this grant money. And one of the things that they've done in response to that is to provide a template for prioritizing projects out of each basin. So we get to tell them which projects are the most important in each basin. And because of that, there is a potential for DWR to go through, and rather than denying entire grants and accepting entire grants, they are going to do their very best, if we do our applications properly, to fund the most important projects for each basin so that everyone gets a bite of this apple. And because of that, that's another thing that we're going to discuss tomorrow. We can prioritize these projects for each basin to give them a better chance of full funding. And that way, if they can't give us the total ask, then we will at least be able to cover the things that are most important.
And just speaking from a little bit of experience, the domestic well component is important in for the disadvantaged communities, and I think that should be something to push on.
It is a favored topic amongst TWR as well.
Yeah.
We will be focusing on domestic wells, small water systems, disadvantaged communities, underrepresented communities. All of those things are taking priority in the application. So thank you.
Okay, any other questions in regards to this? Any other information that we need to review on this?
I would just like to say, as someone who has done a lot of grant writing, it takes a lot to even present this information to us, and it takes a lot to put a grant package like this together. So I want to thank Daniel B. Stevens and Tony Emmert for all the work that's gone into this, and which is going to still go into this. And I'm glad that we have Danielle's support, because it is most definitely an undertaking.
I would completely agree with you, Director. And any other comments from our directors? Yes, Director Villaseñor.
Yes, thank you. Also, I wanted to know Candace's comments as well. Very well done. Thank you for presenting it very well as well. So my question, I don't know if it's a silly question, but it's about regions. And I'd just like to know if, I know when you mentioned about the sort of when they're looking at other basins, right, and the point value, but is there anything in the state about funding in particular regions? You know, is it really point based, or will they see our other basins, our fellow basins in Ventura County, and perhaps you know, is there, you know, a tendency to fund all of them? Is there or more, you know, hey, we're funding a few basins in this area? I just want to know if there was any kind of regional thought put into that in terms of their decision making. Question that came to my mind.
In my conversations with DWR, that has not arisen. That conversation about regionalism and that kind of thing was not an issue. Danielle, you may have some other insights.
My understanding is that the goal is really to fund as many projects as possible with this pool of money. And the way that they are attempting to do that fairly is through the point system. So really, they have lined out explicit instructions for gaining as many points as possible, with the understanding and experience that a lot of those grant applications are not going to hit all of those benchmarks. They will go through and score every application based on points, and that is how they're going to judge the applications. That being said, they have no idea how many submissions there will be, how many of them will be acceptable. There are certain guidelines that will immediately disqualify a grant if they're not met properly. And they don't know what people are asking. The maximum is $20 million and the minimum is $2 million. If they get a huge pool of $2 million grants, they may be able to comfortably fund every one of them that qualifies. If they get a lot of $10 to $20 million asks, that's not going to be the case. And I think that's why they've added in these extra provisions this time to partially fund requests rather than denying entire applications because they've run out of money. Nothing that I've seen has indicated that there's preference based upon region, population, except insofar as they genuinely want to have a focus on severely disadvantaged communities, underrepresented communities, tribal entities, shallow private wells, shallow aquifers. That's really where their priorities are lying.
And if you see the theme in the projects that are proposed for the grant application, we tried to hit those points. The things that we thought DWR is most interested in seeing, and seeing what they funded in other grants previously. We took that to heart and tried to make sure we hit all the talking points that DWR likes to hear about. Hey, you're looking at domestic wells, you're looking at surface water, groundwater interaction, you're doing those kinds of things. So we tried to maximize that, and then Danielle's helping us to make sure in the write-ups that we've got all the right words in there that convince DWR even further.
Director Villaseñor, regarding other basins in this area, the upstream basin of us in the Santa Clarita area is applying for a grant, and their focus is improving their monitoring in the shallow groundwater areas. They have a sort of star-shaped basin up there, and they're really very much like the Fox Canyon GMA, in that they need to gain more information. So their focus was on improving monitoring in the shallow groundwater and the rising groundwater areas and the groundwater dependent ecosystems. And then the critical basins in our area are not applying again. So Cuyama got a grant up in the north part of our county, and as did the two big basins along the coast, the Oxnard Plain and the Pleasant Valley, and they are not applying again. And then I believe the Fox Canyon GMA is applying on behalf of Las Posas, and I don't really have much of an insight into what's included in their grant, but those are some examples of ones that are in the area. And you know, the upstream basin, that's very reasonable for them to try to, you know, they've been working with other parties on trying to get monitoring wells and things put in, just like we did. But monitoring wells are expensive.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. I appreciate all the information.
It will be interesting though to track that conversation, because in other like in California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Southern California definitely got shortchanged in the program, and we had to do a lot of advocating to actually even get a proportion, like a percentage of the overall funding for Southern California. So it will be interesting, and if necessary, we might have to write some letters to that regard if we do get shortchanged. But so it's something worthwhile noting to circle back on.
And Director Minigan, the legislature definitely looks at that too, right? In this case, most of the money I think is coming out of the state's actual budget, not bond funds. And so they all like to see that this is spread around a bit too. Nobody wants to have zero projects funded in their assembly district or senate district.
Mm-hmm. Correct. All right, any other, Director Villaseñor, any other questions? Okay, anyone else? If not, Tony, you want to repeat what, or want to tell us what what your motion you're asking for?
Chair Long, the real motion that we needed was the one that your board graciously provided last time in the adoption of the resolution authorizing us to put this grant together. And Danielle was pestering me about that, and we said, well, we got that already. So that was the main action, and this was really to give you a preview of what's being put together and some editor's privilege if you would like. So I think we've heard all that we need to on this, and we'll get right back to work. Danielle said she's gonna get to work after this meeting. So it's what, 8 o'clock already in Texas. So we'll get back to work and get this done. So I don't think we need anything else from the board right now.
Okay, wonderful. So then it's a receive and file information only, and thank you very much. Next up we'll have is our monitoring well project.
Chair Lung, we have Eric Elliott, who very capably managed that project. And I think Director Menigan was the only person besides Eric and Kathleen that got to see it. But I never made it out there when it was being drilled.
All right, good evening, everyone. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you, Tony, for the introduction. As you mentioned, my name is Eric Elliott, and I'll be presenting a little bit on the installation of those new wells. So I think we're all pretty familiar with the project, but I'll go through a little bit of the background and what got us to actually getting the wells in the ground, and then just a few of the highlights from the construction. So, looking back, the GSA adopted the final GSP in late 2021. And as part of that process, Daniel B. Stevens' staff prepared a data gap analysis and that had a number of key recommendations and findings. However, those largely focused on the potential data gaps in the groundwater dependent ecosystem areas. So Piru Fillmore Basin boundary and Santa Paula Fillmore Basin boundary, as well as recommended a multi-depth completion at the Santa Paula Fillmore Basin boundary, where there was some uncertainty in the down gradient of basin boundary conditions. And so this figure is just relating the GSP's aquifer systems, A, B, and C, with the hydrostratigraphic units and United's model layers. So A and B, the principal aquifers identified in the GSP, and the non-principal aquifer zone C, that's one of the areas we were able to get one of the only monitoring wells in the Fillmore Basin in. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And so, although the data gap analysis did provide some potential, some areas where there was a data gap, United and the county does have a pretty robust network in these basins. So we have good spatial coverage. However, the wells that we monitor are largely screened in the B zone or across the A and B zone. And so where we were really lacking information was in that shallow zone. So the first thing we did was a desktop analysis to see if we could identify some existing wells in the other areas throughout the basin, which we were able to do. I reached out to those well owners. Largely, these were domestic wells, although one was a shallow completion production well. And we have since gotten permission to include those in the monitoring network. Those are included, and that allowed us to focus all the proposed construction and the new construction in the groundwater dependent ecosystem areas. I think everyone's familiar with the project site. So that's City of Fillmore. To the east, we have the Cienega Springs site. That's CDFW owned property at the Fillmore Fish Hatchery. That was, we proposed 3 single completion wells there in the shallow system. And to the west, we have the East Grove site. That's a privately held parcel near the Santa Paula Basin boundary. And so looking first at the East Grove site, we identified quite a few potential locations in this area, reached out to those landowners, and we're really fortunate to find a really cooperative and amenable landowner in the perfect location. So that worked out quite well. After we received the initial permission for drilling, we were granted an easement, or the GSA was granted an easement for ongoing monitoring and maintenance for that well. And then we ultimately contracted with BC2 Environmental, a drilling company, for a mud rotary rig at that site. We ended up with an exploratory borehole to just over 800 feet and a quadruple well completion. So we had initially planned for a triple, but we had already gone that deep, and it seemed to justify the extra cost to get that C-zone monitoring well. And so this figure, this is the geophysics from the deep borehole at the East Grove site. On the right is the well completions with the screened intervals. On the left is the GSP identified aquifer zones, and then those dash boxes are United's model layers, so 3, 5, 7, and layer 9 in the C zone. As I mentioned, we ended up going with 4 completions. So we got the last in the C zone. That's going to be I believe the only C zone screened well in the Fillmore Basin. So that'll give some good baseline data for that deeper zone. And we have one well in each of United's model layers, so that should help with some calibration in that area as well. So here's a few highlights from the construction process. On the left, that is the auger rig. So that advanced a 30-inch borehole to 50 feet, and that's a photo of the conductor casing, a steel conductor casing going in. In the middle, that's the mud rig during the exploratory drilling down to 800, as I mentioned. And on the right is completing the wells, so actually hanging the well casing. So you can see there's 4 strings of casing there. So when hanging the wells in the borehole, the deepest goes in first, and then you add the second, third, and fourth. So this is finishing up that well with all 4 well casings going in at the same time. We also developed and completed these wells in early November. So this well is completely done, developed. I just wanted to throw this in. This is a little drill site ingenuity. We ended up staying pretty late to develop that final well and ran out of fuel. So we ended up siphoning off the bucket loader to get that one done. Moving to the Cienega restoration site. So as I mentioned, this is property owned by CDFW. We reached out to them, went through a few rounds of consultation to get the sites decided. After we were all happy with the locations, which are shown in the red boxes there on the map. The GSA was granted an access agreement, so that'll be for ongoing monitoring maintenance of those wells. And again, we contracted with BC2. At these sites, we use the rotosonic drilling method, and these are 3 shallow single completions in that A zone. So everything went pretty smoothly at this site. We did complete 3 shallow wells. 2 of those are drilled to 100 feet. The third's a little shallower. So these well locations are going to allow for instead of a single point, we can determine gradients and get flow and magnitude of flow across the shallow aquifer at that site. We did find some non-conforming lith at the northernmost well site, which is closest to the fault. There was some tar or free product in the lith from about 38 feet and deeper. And that was kind of surprising because there's an existing production well drilled to 180 feet immediately north of that. But that may end up being something of a good thing. So we ended up completing that well shallower at 16 to 36 feet. But I contacted CDFW and we're going to include the existing abandoned production well. And so that gives us a little bit of a well cluster at that area. So we kind of ended up ultimately with 4 monitoring wells there. That'll allow us to kind of look at the head differentials between the very shallow zone and a little bit deeper. And as I mentioned, these wells are all completed. Again, they've been developed and are going to be included in United's monitoring network. So here's just a couple photos from the drilling process. That photo on the left, that's the rig, as well as our signage that was part of the grant requirements. In the center there, that is the core that comes out of the sonic drilling method. So this one's kind of interesting to be on site for. They advance the bit and then pull that back out after some given interval, maybe 10 feet. And then they extrude the sediment into these bags. And so you get a continuous core of the subsurface for that borehole. So that's pretty interesting. You know, that was quite interesting at the northernmost site, but at the other 2, as you can see, it's a lot of rounded cobble, sands, and gravel. So a great place to have some monitoring wells. And the photo out the right is just the finished surface completion. So we have 3 of those. And I'll tie it up there with, we have the 3 shallow wells completed at Cienega. We finished the quadruple nested at East Grove. Everything's done, developed, and all documentation has been submitted to DWR. I submitted to the county a couple weeks ago. So we're just waiting on state well numbers for those. These well locations, completed in the right areas are going to allow for long-term collection of that pretty critical shallow zone in those rising groundwater areas. The final thing we have to do to finish the project will be instrumenting with transducers. We're planning to do that for each of the wells. So those will be set to likely a 4-hour data record. So that'll allow us to look at some of those short-term, daily, as well as longer-term fluctuations in those wells. And United has just finished up our first round of sampling and water level measurements. So those data should be coming in later this week, probably. So, just to tie it all up, those wells are now included and will be sampled and measured moving forward. So the project, all came in on schedule, on budget, which is great. And those wells are now completed and in the monitoring network. So we should be seeing some good information from those moving forward. With that, happy to take any questions. I know I kind of ran through that quickly, but just wanted to provide an update and also say congrats to the GSA to, I know that was a long time coming, and I'm sure it feels good to have that project completed.
Yes, Eric, that's a great presentation. Thank you so much. Seeing all the gravel and dirt coming out, did we hit water anywhere?
Yeah, we did. At those sites, we hit it around 9 feet.
Okay.
Yeah, so those were drilled to about 100 feet, but the water table is quite shallow there. So yeah, those were definitely saturated.
Okay, great. That's nice to hear.
Yeah.
I like to have the good news of water. Director Kimball.
I want to take a little credit for the GSA that he didn't mention, but the drilling technique that he talked about, United had not been exposed to that before, I believe, and so opened some eyes, and so we, after all the help that United has given us and from the beginning of the GSA, I think maybe the GSA was able to give back a little bit, something that United hadn't seen before and maybe will be of interest in the future. So we were able to return the favor a little bit.
Well, it's always good. So appreciate saying that. Any other directors on this? I know this is a big item for what our GSA has been planning to do for a long time. So to accomplish that is really a great feat. And we all did it basically virtually. So even more so a big accomplishment, but to be there in the ground. And Eric, thank you so much for giving us those visuals so that we could see it somewhat for ourselves and for the public so that they know what's going on as well. It's good for transparency. Any other directors? This is an information item. There is no motion needed. We've already done that. Yes, Director Minigan.
We had spoken about doing some PR. Are we going to do some PR?
Rachel Minigan,
Morgan.
yes. But if I would beg for mercy until we get our grant application done. So yes, we will do that. And then I have it on my list to bring that back and perhaps we discussed maybe some of the directors or all of them maybe wanted to visit some of these sites and or take a tour of the basin, and we have that on the upcoming list, but I just have it as a to-do at the moment, and we're focusing on the grant. But yes.
All right. Yeah, because we've actually just done a new trail at Hedrick Ranch Nature Area. I'm going out there tomorrow, and that might, I don't know if you want to do a ribbon cutting or what, but for the well, because it seems a bit odd, because it's just a plate in the ground. But if if we wanted to go out there, there's actually a trail now that gets you down to the river bottom, and you could go up, like do a walk through the groundwater dependent ecosystem into river bottom. So that's an option.
Yeah, I think that would be a nice thing to consider. Director Menigan, I once helped put together a ribbon cutting for a trash netting system in a concrete storm drain. And it was the most odd and awkward ribbon cutting I've ever had. We dumped a bucket of trash out, but it was a project that took 4 agencies to get together and make this happen because of overlapping jurisdictions. So we can have a ribbon cutting for anything if the board so chooses. But I certainly think it would be nice to visit that area at some time in the near future.
Yeah.
I would agree with Director Minigan. I think that is a great idea that we should do. I would suggest that we do it in January or February after the holidays so that we can get the best attention.
Yeah.
And also to thank DWR. Without the grant, we wouldn't have been able to do that. And I think that that's a very wise decision to do. So I appreciate that, either if it's a walkabout and looking at that or just the ribbon cutting. I think that's an important factor. And
Okay,
also
well,
say thank you to the cities and United and everybody, really just the pumpers associations for actually putting this all together and getting this done. I think that'd be good.
But Chair Long, so we'll work to make that happen, and we can perhaps drag Eddie Petz or somebody from DWR out to our site. And I should, since we're thanking people, this board does recall that we were having a heck of a time getting the easements secured, and it was looking like we were not going to be able to get that done. And Eddie, right at holiday time, went and found his boss before she was leaving on vacation and got her signature for the extension that would allow us to construct this after the bird nesting season. So he went to bat for us and he got that done. So
Exactly. So I appreciate that. Director Kimball.
So make sure. I just wanted to say, that this was a big part of our grant, and you think, well, I mean, we started that. We had some ideas about where we wanted to do it and what we wanted to do, and there was a lot of work done in developing and choosing efficient sites and finding wells that we could use without having to drill ourselves. And then the easement process and both with the private landowner and with the state was an arduous process. Their easements are never easy, and that was a lot of hard work. Almost drilling the wells was the easy part, I suspect. But I really appreciate all the work that United did, and Tony, you and your group did to get here. And I think it's really great because we hear about the basin upstream now asking for funds to do this, and we are one complete cycle ahead in that we identified those at the beginning. While we were trying to do our GSP and we're planning our GSP, we identified it and got the grant funding and completed it before our GSP has even been approved. And hopefully DWR recognizes that, and even if they don't, I think the board should recognize all the hard work that has been done on our behalf, and I really appreciated it. I think that's the work that will set us apart in the future. I know we don't have a severely overdrafted basin and we're not a problem child, but so that makes things easier. We don't have to argue about who gets what water, but still we've done a lot of hard work at the board level and at staff level. And I really appreciate it. I want to say thank you and recognize everybody's hard work.
Thank you. Any other directors? Any other comments from the public? Okay, well then, thank you again, Eric. Appreciate the presentation and all the work for all of you that are on here today and those that are not. Next item we have is our future topic for board discussion. I would like to make sure that on our next meeting, or as soon as we do find out who is our city representative, that we make sure we have that on the docket. I'm hoping that Director Villasenor stays on, but in case she doesn't, I just want to make sure we're prepared as we always do. And I think it's the same for my seat as well. It's assumed that I'm on it, but you never want to assume anything, but it is my district. So what else? Any other future board discussions? Are we going to have a follow-up on the grant or any budget updates?
Yes, I think we would, at our next meeting, we could report to you, where we ended up on all this. And if there are any other questions, we definitely can look into those. And I will keep working with the team on trying to do a cash flow analysis, because I know that's important to think about well in advance. And
Right, and then our billing, do we have to do a resolution soon for the next cycle? No, yes.
no resolution necessary, Chair Long, but it's not too far away that we need to think about with all this new scope of work to start putting a budget together for the next fiscal year. So start all over again.
That's the way it goes. All right. Any other questions, concerns? Again, happy holidays, everyone. We won't be meeting till January 19th. And I think I'm going to be the first to say, and Happy New Year.
Yeah.
It's gone so quickly, and I just appreciate all the hard work and dedication everyone has had. It's been a tremendous year. So just thank you so much. And flu season and COVID is still out there. So just be safe and healthy and enjoy the time with your loved ones. Have a good night.
You all also.
Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.
All right.
Take care. See you soon.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.